I know what you're saying,
Yeah.
that seasonal affective disorder is part of major depressive disorder.
Yeah, it's a type of it.
Does that hang with them throughout the day, even when they're, it's during the day, it's light out, they're at work with their coworkers that they enjoy? Is it like an all day thing?
Yeah, if they have seasonal affective disorder, they are feeling depressed most of the day, even during the light hours.
Okay.
Okay?
Wow. Hi, and welcome back to The Vitals, Mount Sinai Health System's new groundbreaking video podcast. I'm your host, Leslie Schlachter, a neurosurgery physician assistant here at the Mount Sinai Hospital. Today, we're talking with Dr. James Murrough, a psychiatrist and professor here at Mount Sinai, on the subject of seasonal affective disorder. I can tell you from firsthand experience, I definitely experience some level of seasonal affective disorder. When the clock changes, it starts getting dark at 5 o'clock, I want to cancel my plans, I don't want to go to the gym, I just want to get home, get in my pajamas, and just cuddle up and go to sleep. And I'm sure other people feel that way too. So we're going to find out today what's just seasonal blues and what's actually seasonal affective disorder. Thank you so much for being here.
Happy to be here.
This topic is pretty near and dear to my heart because not only do I feel like I suffer from some level of this, but my daughter definitely does. So much where I'm like, God, should we just be moving to Florida or something, or changing our location altogether?
Yep.
So I'm really excited about today because if there's anything that probably a lot of us in the Northeast could learn, I want to learn it. So what is seasonal affective disorder? SAD.
Yeah. So some form of feeling sad, blue, down in the winter months when the days are shorter is actually very common. Now, seasonal affective disorder is a technical term, but actually it's just a form of depression, or what we call major depressive disorder. And we think the seasonal form of major depression, or think of it as like clinical depression, this is more than just feeling down or the blue, that affects about 5% of the U.S. population. So again, even the full clinical form of the illness is actually pretty common.
So depression is like an actual diagnosis. It's in
Correct.
the DSM, which
it's in the DSM.
What does the DSM stand for?
The
again?
DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It's kind of like the Bible.
Okay.
So
Right.
if you're a psychiatrist like myself, this is where you look up what are the official psychiatric illnesses that are
Psychiatric Bible.
The Psychiatric Bible, exactly.
Is seasonal affective disorder in there as a diagnosis?
Interestingly, no.
Okay.
So what's in there is what we call major depressive disorder, or MDD. So when you hear depression in kind of a medical or scientific context, that's what we mean, major depression.
So is it listed under there as one of the forms?
That's right. It's what's called a specifier. So if somebody
Okay.
has clinical depression or major depression, and they have a certain feature where essentially they just get sick during the winter months, and that happens over several seasonal cycles, the doctor will then give it's some technical term like depression with seasonal features.
Okay. And that it's like a diagnosis code.
That's a diagnosis. There's a diagnostic code, and it goes to your insurance company and the whole thing. That's the official. So it's a form of or a subtype of clinical depression.
Okay. I'm the host, so I can make the rules.
Right.
I'm going to spend the next couple minutes as your patient.
Okay.
So pretend I'm your patient. I'm
Yes.
really seeing you.
Yep.
I am, for those who all know me, I am like top 10. I'm just happy.
Okay.
I love life.
Okay.
I am probably one of the most productive people out there. I mean, I could multitask all day long if my
Okay.
body would let me.
Mm-hmm.
When the time changes
Yep.
and it starts getting dark and cold,
Yep.
especially, God forbid, it's dark, cold, and raining.
Yep.
Instead of leaving work and going to the gym and meeting friends for whatever, I just want to go home, put on my pajamas,
Yep.
get in bed.
Yep.
And I don't want to do a damn thing. And it's
Yep.
really depressing because I
Yep.
find myself, I'll cancel plans.
Yep.
I will skip going to the gym, which is my favorite thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And this lingers for weeks for me until I'm finally like, well, this is not a way to live for the next couple of months. And I
Right.
have to pull myself out of it.
Yes.
So do I have SAD?
You have again the having sort of seasonal blues. Think of it like that is really common. If you were to come in, you're my patient, and you say, "Doc, I'm not feeling myself." Often patients will say that we're always looking in psychiatry. Is it a change? Right? Everybody's different. Everyone has their own routines. But when they come in or they're brought in by their family, if it's more severe, doc, they're not like they used to be. And the change and the bar for making a diagnosis of major depression is actually fairly high. So typically, it's not just that it's you feel down or it's more difficult to do things, but actually, are you missing work?
Okay.
Um,
So
we-
I have like blues.
Probably. Now, we
Right.
haven't done a full diagnostic interview, right? But probably.
Mm-hmm.
But things I'm looking for to sort of make the diagnosis. So if you think of it like this, first we're thinking about making the diagnosis of major depression, and then we ask the question, does this have seasonal features?
I see.
Right? It's sort
Okay.
of two-step. So do you have clinical or what we call major depression, which is basically, if you look it up in the big book, you have persistent sad or low mood most days of a given week, nearly every day, most of the day.
I don't have
For
seasonal.
weeks.
I don't have that. So
Okay.
I think I'll be okay.
And it's a change. It always has to be a change from, so people come in and they say, yeah, I'm not happy, I'm not productive, I have sleep disturbances, which we'll talk about more, which is also a feature of depression. And then we say, okay, so when did this start? And they say, well, I've always been like that. That's harder to make then, right? Because is it an illness that you have, that there's a treatment that you could recover, or is this something else? So
So for people that
yeah.
have like just to focus on, and I know what you're saying,
Yeah.
that seasonal affective disorder is like is part of major depressive disorder.
Yeah, it's a type of it.
But do they does that hang with them throughout the day, even when like they're, it's during the day, it's light out, they're at work with their coworkers that they enjoy. Is it like an all day thing?
Yeah, if they have seasonal affective disorder, they are feeling depressed most of the day, even during the light hours.
Okay.
Okay.
Wow.
So that's different than, and we started noticing this a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
You look out the window, it's
And you're
5
just
o'clock,
like-
and it's dark, and that feels kind of crummy.
Yeah.
And I think what that is I think that tells us a little bit about, we'll get into this later, the pathways that actually detect light in the environment project directly into the parts of the brain that control our emotion, which
Okay.
is really interesting. So like a lot of things we deal with in psychiatry, the full medical illness, major depression, seasonal affective disorder, they represent like so many things in medicine, there's really a continuum. That represents the most severe. You
Right.
need treatment. We're thinking about you need structured psychotherapy, medication. We'll get into that, things like that. But it represents a continuum, right? We all have kind of similar brains. We live in the same environment, and our bodies and our minds are responding to stimuli. So it's common. Less light tends to lead to low moods, and then seasonal affective disorder, conveniently maybe referred to as SAD sometimes, right? It's kind of the end of that spectrum of like,
Got
these
it.
are folks that they present, or they should talk to your doctor. You're not getting out of bed. Maybe you're in college and you're missing classes. Those are the
Right.
things that bring people in. There's real, what we call functional disruption in their daily activities.
So what does the research show us about this diagnosis?
Yeah.
Like, does it affect certain regions, certain age groups,
Yeah.
gender?
Yeah, it's more common in women, but that's also seen in non-seasonal depression, I guess.
Okay.
Let's say it like that. Interestingly, folks have looked at this, and there's a little bit of inconsistency in the literature, but the farther you are from the equator, okay, the days tend to be shorter, less light, colder.
Right.
The incidence in those populations or those countries of seasonal affective depression is higher. So there does seem to be a relationship between like
Yeah.
how much light
What
you
about
get.
just like regular depression?
That's pretty consistent, interestingly. Regular depression, one of the remarkable things is if, you look at epidemiologic studies and, because sometimes people think, well, maybe it's a cultural phenomenon, right? Or in the U.S. and, it's because
Right.
we have TikTok and fast food, whatever. But the interesting thing is you look at different cultures, high income versus low income economies, world economies, countries. Clinical depression, the way it presents and the frequency is pretty much the same.
And
So
what about age groups?
again, pretty similar.
Okay.
So we know that depression, like many illnesses in the sort of psychiatric realm, they tend to strike folks actually when they're younger, young adults,
Right.
20s. This can be part of why, depression is associated with more disability than pretty much any other medical illness. If you can imagine, well, why is that? Part of it is a lot of chronic medical illnesses affect people when they're older, 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond.
Yeah.
Depression, bipolar disorder, anxiety, those are hitting again. Folks as they're trying to get through high school, college, start families. And for those that unfortunately have a chronic or recurrent course, it can really kind of knock them off their productivity, and that stays with them throughout their life.
Yeah, I've never thought of that concept before.
Yeah.
About like a lot of the diseases that we treat. I work in neurosurgery, so you know, brain tumors and aneurysms affect all ages, but a lot of what we treat affects people older and like retirement. Depression is like
Right.
Those are working people.
Oh yeah, I think the peak onset is maybe early 30s.
Yeah.
I think a little bit younger, a little bit earlier in women. Back to what you're interested in non-seasonal depression, it seems to affect women about 2 to 1. The ratio or the degree to which there's a disproportionate impact on women versus men is actually more. So the estimates for seasonal. In seasonal depression, it's almost like the estimates are almost up to like 4 to 1.
Yeah. Do you think it's hormone related? You would like. I'd have to think.
You have to
think. Imagine that.
We don't know. So there's been studies. What is light? We talked about light. Light gets into the brain.
Right.
Interestingly, or the signals of light get into the brain.
Mm-hmm.
And we can talk more about that. It affects neurotransmitter and hormone levels. Light, we know that. Melatonin, everyone heard about that. Cortisol. And, you know, it's still, I hate to say it as a psychiatrist and a researcher, we still don't fully understand why are women more vulnerable to depression than men. Even for non-seasonal depression, we just don't really understand. There's lots of theories. It's hard to think that fluctuations in sex hormones are not related. We know.
It's because we have to put up with men.
That could be it. That actually would explain
that would
a
actually
lot.
explain so much.
Right? We know there's premenstrual dysphoric disorder that's been in the last decade much more recognized and now is actually in the big book of diagnosis we talked about.
Yep.
You talk to women that have almost like full-blown, like they have severe depression around that time in their period, and with treatment, targeted medication, they say change their life.
So you were kind of like
so the hormones are related.
So you're edging towards like translational neuroscience. Like, so what is translational neuroscience?
Translational neuroscience is essentially, you know, most neuroscience or typical neuroscience is studying cells, chemicals, genes, things like that. How does it affect the brain? Often not in humans, you know, laboratory mice, things like that, fruit flies. Translational neuroscience is the translate is meaning the translating is from basic science like the wet lab and the bench, you know, you see like on commercial, you know, the scientists with beakers and you know, test tubes, like what are they doing versus how does a new treatment get to patients?
Yeah.
The translation.
Like how do we go from there to helping patients?
Exactly. And that's what our group focuses on, to how do we go from beakers and test tubes and lab rats to new treatments for patients. And it's
so
a continuum.
How are you doing that?
How do you do it?
How are you doing that here specifically for SAD?
Yeah, so one way we do it is we use technologies like functional brain imaging or EEG, which can measure brain waves on the scalp, to look at if people are in a depression or not, what's different in the brain.
Right.
And then if we give a treatment, be it psychotherapy or a medication, does that change a brain signature? And that can give us an indication of the next time someone in the lab finds a new drug, for example, we can ask the question, does that affect the brain signature which we've associated with the illness? So it's using sort of neuroscience tools in people, if that makes sense.
Yep, it does.
There's one technology that we're collaborating with a group at Mount Sinai. One of the very important treatments for seasonal affective disorder is light therapy.
Right.
And we can talk more about that.
I want to talk a lot about that.
Let's talk
but
about
we'll put a pin in that because
Yeah.
I'm not there yet.
Okay, let's talk about that later because there's a really cool technology. There's some new technological developments around light therapy.
Right.
That I think represents an exciting area of new research. And then other things is just kind of going back to what we talked about seasonal is a form of depression. We're trying to understand what causes depression in the brain.
Right.
And what would be new ways to treat that here at Mount Sinai. So we've been studying, for example, ketamine for depression.
Right.
Okay. We're studying, in collaboration with our basic neuroscience friends, discovered a new a protein in the brain that was known but wasn't known to be involved in stress response and
What's the
depression.
protein?
It's called a KCNQ channel.
Okay.
Okay. It's a type of potassium channel in the brain. It regulates cells activity, and cool work by Eric Nestler, others at Mount Sinai showed that in laboratory mice, this protein was important for protecting them against the type of depression you can measure in mice, like them not wanting to interact with other mice or things
The lonely
like that.
mice.
The lonely mice.
The mice in the corner.
That's right. So when you stress a mouse, but it's not so lonely, these are the resilient mice, they have more of this protein. So we're doing clinical trials to give a drug that increases this protein in people with depression to see if it's antidepressant.
That's incredible.
That type of thing. If that works, then we would test that in, for example, seasonal depression.
You said you do functional MRI scans,
Yes.
I heard. So what are you guys doing? Are you doing like an fMRI in like the dead of winter and then again in the middle of in summer? Or,
We haven't done that, but if we did, there would be some specific hypotheses. For example, we've been using a new what's called a high field 7 Tesla imaging at Mount Sinai, where you can look at little bitty parts of the brain that we couldn't see even a few years ago.
We use that in our department for like cranial nerves.
There you go. Yeah. So it turns out there's a part of the brain that's really important that if it's overactive, your mood is like in the tank.
Okay.
It's called the anterior subgenual cingulate cortex. That's a mouthful.
Yep.
But it's like hot or overactive, and this has been shown many times. And we just did
like with vascular flow or what?
Yes, some stuff with like metabolism, high metabolism. Like for example, with FDG PET, you could do a blood flow MRI, show more blood flow. Another thing we like to do is we'll have the individual engage in like a task, play a game in the scanner. So I'll give you an example. They could be playing almost like a gambling game. You could win or lose money, and then we can look at what parts of the brain are like light up when they're told, oh, something good happened, or you've lost. If you're in a depression, the you've lost signal is extra high.
Okay.
And again, over research, we know some areas, and in particular, this part of the brain seems to be overactive to lost negative information. And we use a technique also called functional connectivity, just sort of how dominant is that part of the brain and kind of the rest of the brain, like the ecosystem of the brain. How dominant is that? If you look at it, it's like, for example, networks. This was a new study we did in people with depression. That part of think of like the negative mood network is overly connected. Think of it like that. So we haven't done the study, but the hypothesis would be, even for you, if you're having some symptoms, right? I scan you during the winter months, I scan you during the summer. In the winter months, I would predict that part of your brain was overconnected.
Got it.
Right? Overactive. And that's the type of brain biomarker that we hope in the future can be like right now, a psychiatrist, we can't really order a test to help us with depression.
Right.
If I wanted
it's a diagnosis of communication. It's a checklist.
Sit down just like this. Right. It's still based on history, taking a history, listening to the patient. But one day we'd like to have medical tests. We don't want to be left out in the cold. We like neurology, neurosurgery, neuroradiology. We want to get in on that. And so that's a lot of what our work is doing, what are features. We know that if you have seasonal depression, and I do a regular radiologic scan of your brain, just like if you want to, doctor wanted to make sure you didn't have a tumor, that's going to be completely clean, right? The doctor's going to say, oh, nothing in your brain, I'm going to refer you to a psychiatrist.
Right.
What we'd like one day to be able to do a brain scan to help the psychiatrist, oh, your subgenual cingulate is overactive. That way, that helps confirm my suspicion that you have a clinical depression. And even better, does it tell me what type of treatment I can give you?
Oh, that's amazing.
That's what we really like to do.
Yeah, so there's like the radiologic side of things, but then obviously there's like the hormonal and neurotransmitter.
Right.
So like standard psychiatric treatment, like SSRIs. So we're looking at all right, so serotonin.
Right.
Dopamine.
Yes.
GABA.
Okay.
Like what treatments are there out there that, like what are we targeting most of the time?
Serotonin still dominates.
Okay.
Right. These are the SSRIs. These are the first
like
line.
Prozac. Zoloft.
Exactly.
Okay.
Lexapro. You name it.
Okay.
If you go to your primary care doctor, you have depression, or you say something's not right. I don't want to get out of bed anymore. I have fatigue. I'm not going to the gym. I'm not returning people's phone calls.
This is their first line treatment, SSRI.
They're going to prescribe you an SSRI.
Okay.
And with any luck, after a few weeks of treatment, that person's going to start feeling better. And that happens between 50 and 60% of the time.
Okay.
So there's also, you hear a lot of debate about, well, do antidepressants work? And There's a lot of, or is it they overprescribe, underprescribe, all that stuff. They work for most people, but we know there's much more to the story than serotonin for lots of reasons.
So like let's say you tried a couple meds, you go up, you're doing everything in your power, and anything serotonin is not working.
That's right. So we see that all the time. And again, they come to me. If the SSRI worked, we never see them, right? At the depression center because they just got the treatment at their...
Hopefully their primary care is just taking care of it.
Exactly. And again, I think most people, it does work for, but we estimate about a third of all adults with major depression are not effectively treated with really any available treatments, or at least the standard first-line treatments like the Prozac drugs. And we should hasten to add good evidence-based psychotherapy. So
God forbid people do something other than take a
prescribe-
pill.
Yes, you could prescribe psychotherapy. And again, by the time the patients come to me, if they haven't also had good psychotherapy, that's at the top of my list. But it can be hard work, difficult to access, expensive. You know, you hear this. There aren't enough
Time-consuming.
There aren't enough therapists.
Yeah.
Even in New York City, I don't know if that's possible, but that's...
Well, a lot of people are doing them online. There's like Zoom, CBT.
Yeah, so I think that's actually an exciting, the issue of access to care is a huge one for mental health. So the advent of accessible online platforms for therapy and things like that, I think that's going to be a good thing. I think the questions are going to be, as a field, making sure there are standards in place, who's delivering the therapy, right, all that stuff. But the access to care, I think, is really important because it is actually very hard to access high-quality psychotherapy in New York and many states in the country. It's much more difficult.
Right.
Just
I'm sure.
There's a lot of psychiatrists in New York.
There are, yeah.
And there's still not enough, if you can believe it.
I would imagine that whether it's someone like me who experiences seasonal blues or someone who has a diagnosis or was told they have seasonal affective disorder will go onto Amazon and buy a light.
Okay.
So now we're going to talk about light
Let's
therapy.
talk about
I want
light
to talk about like what you see people do on their own, which I've done before. I've bought the lights.
Okay, good.
And then like what you actually, what's the good light? How do you know it's a good light? Is it the right wavelength? I want to know it all.
Yeah, so 40,000 lux. Okay,
I'm writing this down.
Write this down. It's had a certain amount of brightness, and there's all colors. And I actually saw there was a meta-analysis where they compared, but just the white light's fine. So what's called broad spectrum light, which is just a fancy way of saying it's white.
Okay.
But it has even a larger spectrum of visible light than a standard light bulb. But to the human eye, it just looks white. So don't worry about the different colors. People say, oh, blue, red. Get the broad spectrum.
Okay.
40,000 lux is the strength. It's a measure of how bright. So you want that sucker bright.
Got it. Bright.
Big box. Don't mess around with one of these little tiny things on the desk.
Yep.
It should be like this big. 30 minutes at minimum each morning.
Is there a rule about like how far it should be from you, how close? Like if it's across the room, it's not going to work.
Yeah, you should be within approximately, I think it's like 1 foot. Again, if you find there are good reputable resources, websites like check me on this, but the lux value, the brightness, you should be relatively close. I don't know why I'm using my hands because your podcast.
Well, you're
can't
doing
see
it for
this.
the people who are video.
Okay, right.
Not
all right,
just
okay,
audio.
Right. So, but typically you're sitting in front of it for at least 30 minutes. And I should say, if I didn't, some studies, but not all, show that up to 60 minutes gives you even more of a boost.
So maybe like you get up in the morning for, let's say me, if I'm doing my makeup, it's sitting on my counter.
Yep.
If I'm sitting down having breakfast and then doing some emails.
Totally.
But if it's hard to get it in 30 minutes in the morning off to work, even just sitting on your desk at the beginning of the day while you're doing your emails and stuff, stick it right in front of you.
That's right. That's right. As long as ideally you're looking at it, but as long as it's kind of in your field of view and the lights get into your eyes, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Morning. Why morning?
I mean, think of it as kind of kick. We talked about we haven't talked that much, I guess, about circadian rhythms, but part of what we think is happening with seasonal depression is the circadian rhythms they're just getting off. There's a lack of light overall, but also there's sort of a mismatch, and the cues that the body and the brain need to sort of like restart, get the energy, it's time for the day to start. Part of that is triggered, including the hormones that are released, to
So
tell
like
the body.
melatonin at night to go to sleep.
Melatonin
in the
comes
morning
down.
you get your cortisol bump, and then again in the afternoon.
Exactly.
So
But in depression, that cortisol bump doesn't come
the morning or both?
in the morning,
Okay.
and it's like delayed. So part of the theory, there's also fluctuation in serotonin.
Okay.
Okay, so part of the theory is you hit them with the light in the morning that will get the kind of daily activated cortisol, serotonin systems going. Okay, and try to and sort of what's called like entrain, get the parts of the brain that are sensitive to light to like, hey, it's time for the day.
So to be devil's advocate, why not just give like 20 milligrams of hydrocortisone upon waking?
Well, it's tricky. People have tried this, okay? But the body is so good at adjusting. It has all these checks and balances and levers, right? This is what are always,
Yeah.
the body's always defeating. We give it one thing, it changes to something
Right.
else. It's trying, because it's trying to maintain a homeostasis.
Right.
It's just the set point is off,
Okay.
okay? So if I give hydrocortisone, all of the systems in the body that quickly adjust and clamp down, like the body will stop releasing as much of its own
It'll be like,
cortisol.
I see your hydrocortisone, but I'm going to negative feedback that and
Exactly.
shut that down.
Correct.
Got it. Okay.
That seems to be why those, and the cortisol system in particular is very good at rapidly adjusting.
Yeah.
So that's proven to be just it should work, but
But it doesn't.
Right.
So a big box of light works better.
Big box of light.
Can you get that on Amazon, or does that have like a special order from a doctor?
Nope. You can get it.
All right. So for all those people going on to Amazon as they're listening to us,
Right.
they're gonna see Amazon bestseller. This one's $39.99. That one's $5,000. This one's how much should you be like? How much is the right amount to spend on the right
It
light?
shouldn't be terribly expensive.
Give an example, if you can.
I mean, it shouldn't be more than $100.
Okay.
I don't remember exactly.
Shouldn't be more than 100-ish.
No.
Okay.
And honestly, I mean, I like everybody else. I mean, I just look at what has the most reviews.
I
the
know.
most
Yeah, I do that
stars.
too.
I mean, right?
So really, they're focusing on the 40,000
40,000
lux, broad spectrum light,
And if you can do,
big like a box.
yeah, big, bigger the better.
Mm-hmm.
And there's probably, I would say do a little bit of homework. So find like there are reputable organizations. Don't make me name one,
okay.
like seasonallaffectivedisorders.com, but
Right.
we'll find something that you trust. You could always go to start out by going to the American Psychiatric Association, apa.org. There's got to be links to seasonal affective
Like
disorders.
ones that they approve. Yeah.
Exactly. Do a little bit of homework, but hopefully if the markets and all that work out, that should align with what's the most popular light box on Amazon.
Right.
But
One would hope.
do a little bit of homework.
What was the technology that you were taught? You had said like, there was
so
some
this
new
is-
technology.
Yeah, so this is being worked on by a group at Mount Sinai, and this is pretty wild. So as I understand it, you can actually wear what's called a light mask at night while you sleep. Okay, so while you sleep,
This defeats
it's-
everything you just said.
Right. Exactly. Forget I ever said anything. Okay. Forget everything I said before this. You wear a mask which is delivering certain wavelengths of, but again, forget everything I said before, blue, red light. Can't
Is it
remember.
like a near infrared, something you can't even see?
And you sleep through this, and you're getting this light. And this early trials. This has been shown to improve mood, improve memory. There was a clinical
So
trial.
it's
in
really
individuals
doing
with
something at the
Alzheimer's.
cellular level.
Yes.
Not the eyes, not deep in the eyes.
It's getting it goes into so the light goes into the eyes,
Okay.
goes to the retina.
The light that you can't see, but you know it's there.
Correct.
Got it.
And the regular light goes to the retina, and then that stuff projects. Of course, it goes to the visual cortex to see, but then it goes down into the hypothalamus, which is a very, very, very old part of the brain, at the base of the brain, and it turns out that's where the brain's internal clock is. Mm-hmm. So what's cool is that, and again, it's not just for the technology with the mask, but in general light, it's actually telling, besides being able to see, there's actually direct projections from the retina to the parts of the brain that it's like a timekeeper inside, like your body knows. You ever like you start just waking up before your alarm goes off?
Yeah. I mean, like, do you mean like the area that secretes melatonin or a separate area?
It's all connected down
Yeah.
there. That's right. The hypothalamus.
That's where I live in neurosurgery. I'm a
yeah.
pituitary person, so
Okay,
I live
it's
at the
right there.
pituitary, the hypothalamus, the third ventricle. You're in my home.
Suprachiasmatic.
Yeah, I'm there.
You're there.
Yeah.
SCN.
Okay.
The SCN is the clock of the brain.
Yes.
And they're direct projections from the retina down there, which I think is super cool.
So I'm 46 years old and I'm doing like all the things to help my face. And one of them is those masks that you wear. Like you wear this mask, it's red light. It's either like red light or near infrared, or you can put them both on. So this mask that you're talking about, when you put it on,
Right.
if someone were looking at me, would they visibly see light?
I don't think so.
Okay, so it's as if you're putting something without light on, but supposedly there is.
No, I have not used it. Okay, but
it's not going to hold you back from sleeping. I wouldn't want to sleep with some light on my face.
No, I know. That's what's amazing about it. You don't. This is my understanding. You sleep through it, and you can get much more light.
Where does one purchase this product?
It's
in research?
Research only for now.
Can I participate in this research trial?
Can you? Yes.
I also would like them to add another endpoint to this, which is, does it boost collagen in the skin and help with skin elasticity?
There you go.
That's what I want to know. Especially if it's like, I think the red light therapy that I use, the setting to improve skin is red and near infrared, and it's like 20 minutes a day.
If it turned out that was the same, that would be cool.
Yeah,
then you'd have one mask.
Make a ton of money.
One mask for everything.
You guys would make a ton of money. Okay, so obviously, like, I want a lot of people listening to this are going to take away things. They're going to go buy light boxes. They may go see their psychiatrist.
Yeah.
But what are some preventative steps you can take? I know that it's getting ready to be, what's it called when the time changes? Daylight savings. Like, what are prevention tips that you can give for people?
Yeah, no, this is actually one of the most important things, because actually the way we make the diagnosis is it happens, it's not just once. So again, think the person who's vulnerable to full seasonal affective disorder, often they already have a diagnosis of depression, and then they realize, and through careful, it takes a while to realize this over a few years, right? A few seasonal cycles. Geez, doc, every time the fall, winter rolls around, my depression gets much worse.
Yeah.
I have many patients that are like this.
Oh, yeah. It took me this long to figure out this was a thing.
And so it's exactly what you said. Okay, we start the treatments early. So you have individuals that have clinical depression, but then they know they're vulnerable for a relapse or a worsening. And then you do have people that really never get depressed except during the low daylight months, okay? In either case, the key is to be ready for it, and you start the treatment. So I have patients that maybe, again, they're not on anything. Maybe they see a therapist once a week, once a month, just to kind of help with stress management, coping. They start going every week or twice a week. The patient that is not on an SSRI, but we've learned through experience, we're going to start them on 10 milligrams.
Right.
And we're going to start in like September.
Yep.
We're not going to wait, like it's getting late.
Yeah,
right?
Whoops,
like
I should
right
have been
now.
on it.
Which,
yeah.
okay. But if you're out there and go ahead. It's not too late to go talk to your doctor. But then for the next season, start, even August,
Pull out
September.
your light in September.
That's right.
What are like a list of other things? So medication, cognitive behavioral therapy,
Right.
light therapy, anything else?
Right. I mean, you have the lifestyle stuff. So you mentioned going to the gym.
Yep.
If there's another clinical trial showing that going to the gym is good for your depression, like we just don't need another study. There's no question.
Or like go in the morning instead of at night when it's dark. Go when it's light so that you're in a good mood.
Yep.
Yeah.
So again, start, like, people know, and again, particularly if they've been through depression, through anxiety, these tend to be chronic illnesses that are managed.
Mm-hmm.
They go through periods of remission and relapse, like so many things in medicine, right? And they've learned that, again, all those stuff we already know, eating right, physical exercise.
What about like social plans?
Very important.
Yeah.
So, like, I tell my patients, humans are like, we're social creatures. Like, those friendships need to be watered. We need to.
Right.
That's like the ecosystem we live in. Like, it's like food for us, social interaction, okay? You have to have it.
What's like the winter version of, let's just like go to Central Park and hang out and like meet for a drink. What's the winter version of that when it's freezing?
Do that except at like a cozy
come over for a dinner party.
cafe or like a cozy. How fun is it to go to a cozy restaurant when it's cold out and something nice, something warm,
and have an old fashioned.
Yeah, well, I mean, alcohol's but yes, right.
Alcohol probably makes things worse.
It can, not too much.
Okay,
but start early, and what I also say to people is the things that let's call them lifestyle changes or factors that are important for protecting against depression, for making depression less severe, making it less common, right? We're always it's not like a light switch.
Right.
Oh, I started going to the gym, so I'm never going to get depressed again. It doesn't work like that.
Now you have to keep doing it.
Okay, you got to keep doing it, and even if you do, you'd still get depressed maybe, but maybe it's not as severe. Maybe it doesn't last as long. And it's all these little things, and like patients are always like, "Doc, come on, there's so much." I say, "I know it's hard, it's tough, but start early." And the things. Oh, what I was going to say is things that are important to mitigate depression, like having a robust social network, keeping up with your friends. That's actually hard to do when you're depressed.
It's really hard.
That's the hardest time. So,
Unless you have really good friends who know that about you and pull you out.
That's right. Hopefully they stick
Yeah.
with you, and patients will tell me, yeah, I could have been a family member or friend. They reached out. I haven't responded. I said, look, I know but just text them.
Yeah.
Because you're going to need that.
Right.
So it's almost like as you're coming in, if you're vulnerable to seasonal depression, as you're coming into the winter months, again, almost like go that extra mile, build up those relationships because you're going to need them, and
It's like hibernating. It's like eating to get ready for hibernation.
Exactly.
You got to hang out with all of your friends so that they're there for you and ready when you need them.
That's right.
In the winter months.
That's
Okay.
right? Because once you're depressed, you're not going to be like the best friend
Yeah.
there ever was. But
You got to store up your extra credit points.
that's right.
Totally. I
Yeah.
get that.
Yeah.
What are some of what have you found success with your patients that they do either preventatively or in their acute on chronic moment?
I think, again, anticipate things. So this can also happen with depression where even if it's not seasonal, after a while, we recognize triggers, patterns.
Yeah.
You can imagine it could be, again, family dynamics, holidays coming up, we prep for that.
Right.
And then simple things like keep a routine, keep a list. So, when you wake up and you're having one of those days where nothing's going right and you're just putting yourself down. A lot of time in depression, we're putting ourselves down.
Yeah.
Right? Negative self-talk.
Yep.
So, okay, we'll work on that in a session. We'll make a list ahead of time of what are the positive things you're going to say about yourself. Oh, doc, that's silly. No, just write it down. And then it sounds
in that moment, you go back and read it, and you're like,
you pull it out.
Yeah.
It
And you
sounds-
wrote it. Like, remind yourself that.
These are simple things. These are all tenets of what's called like cognitive or cognitive behavioral therapy, right? So it's not rocket science, but it also doesn't necessarily come natural to people, and it helps to have, you're in that case, your doctor, your therapist is sort of acting also kind of like a coach. Like,
Yeah.
hey, we're not solving the
Everything
world here, but
requires work.
yeah,
Some of you said
Yes.
like 60. I think you said like 60% of 50 or 60 will respond to just a pill, but the other people, there's like real work that goes into having to get you to the right place.
Yep.
What
Even the people that are getting the pill, I mean, again, it's all like I find with depression, it's always like a little bit of, again, do the work, also the medication, also, right, good lifestyle. Like it's a multi-treatment approach.
Yeah.
It's not one thing.
Multimodal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
What are you most excited about that's like either in the research phase or almost out of research that you think will make a big impact?
I think for seasonal affective disorder, I think once we understand, I mean, we touched on this a little bit. How does serotonin change? Why does it change? What are the neurotransmitters which are actually driving it? And then instead of just prescribing your favorite SSRI, like we mentioned, I think there's like 7 marketed SSRIs and a gazillion other similar antidepressants. But what if we could understand for that form of depression, which of those treatments is going to be the one that's the most likely to help? Or even better, for you as an individual, what can I prescribe? So again, this is in depression in general. We're working towards very hard to try to get to a point where through defining subtypes of illness, including their brain or hormone correlates, and being able to bring a testing to part of what happens when you go in and see a psychiatrist. Part of it is with the goal of matching the patient to the treatment and again, there's progress in this, and I think my hope is in the next few years, 5 years, there's going to be real, like we're going to understand there's depression type A, B, C, D.
Right.
You
I
know?
also think like evolution is probably changing this too, because like everything that you might be seeing now might have been different 20 years ago when there was no social media. Because like
Yeah.
social
Yes.
media, I know, is playing a factor in this.
Well, it's what we were talking about how we're such social creatures. So no wonder we have social media. And the hope was, and to some degree, I mean, it's often, I feel like so many things, often there are negative headlines about social media.
Right.
But we all probably know in our own lives or know people, or there are circumstances which it's amazing how
Yeah.
groups of people can get together, how friends can stay in touch, and that was the hope, and still is, that sort of allows those social contexts to be nurtured in a way that's so much richer
Right.
than, in the old days. I mean, it's kind of cool. You hear, the letters people would
Right.
exchange. You don't hear about that. I can't think last time I wrote a letter.
Right.
But, we've always had this. So when it used to be,
It's just a different form of it.
a pigeon had to carry a letter through the air. I mean,
Right.
right now we have Facebook or whatever. So we're social creatures. We're always going to do that. I don't know if it was predicted, but I think there is a downside that maybe wasn't completely anticipated of social media, where I think just that you can get so much, like even just on an individual person basis, so much negativity and negative social
Right.
interactions can happen at a scale that it would, it's, again, if you're sending letters by pigeon, like you just never,
Yeah. That's a
t-
large quantity
like 10
letter.
pigeons were going
Yeah.
to come to you, or 100, but hundreds or thousands of people being able to say something mean about you
Yeah.
from around
In
the
like
world.
an hour. Yeah.
So, man, I mean, it cuts both
Is
ways.
it possible? So they say that the reason why people like doom scroll is
Mm-hmm.
like you get that constant like dopa hit.
Right.
Is it possible that's like good for the brain for people with depression?
So we know that dopamine hits themselves are not necessarily good in terms of emotion, but they tell dopamine is a really important neurotransmitter, and it kind of like on a simple level, it sort of tells the brain, it tells us, hey, pay attention to this.
Right.
So there's a natural, like it feels good. What does feeling good mean? There's a reason why subjectively there's a positive feeling, because the brain is learning something, or it thinks it is. And that's kind of the dopamine hit. And you know the story, drugs of abuse.
Right.
Often they deliver dopamine hits.
Right.
And so that's part of what makes it hard to. That's what we call reinforcing. And in that case, it's a chemical, but there can be other non-chemical, environmental things that also trigger these dopamine hits. So it can act like, quote, a drug, right? Because it does have these dopamine hits in a way that's not, the hardware and the chemistry of our brain, presumably evolved to let us navigate our lives over a long period of time. And then kind of how that responds in the modern era is like, well, dopamine wasn't meant to be released from doom scrolling, but it is, right?
Yeah.
'Cause hits of information. Well, we talked about being social creatures, right?
Right.
It's a little bit of social information, boom, a little hit.
Yeah.
Because being a social creature was critical to our evolution, right?
Yeah.
That's why those systems respond like that.
I see.
It just didn't know that, right?
What about your work with ketamine?
Yeah.
And
So-
why can it not be in the water?
why can't it be?
I think it should be.
I see. It reminds me of stories about lithium being in the water, and they've actually done studies that the higher the lithium level in the drinking water, the lower the suicide rates by country. It was really interesting.
Let's go lithium.
But, maybe the same thing with ketamine. Ketamine's a fascinating drug. It's an anesthetic. It's been around forever. And a couple of decades ago, first small studies were done, including by Dennis Charney, John Crystal, that you give a single injection of ketamine. This is typically given like intravenously. And folks, even with severe depression, would start feeling better within like a day.
Right.
We talked about the first-line treatments with SSRIs, which can be very effective.
So these are like refractory cases.
Yeah, and eventually we went on to study clearly documented refractory, what we call treatment resistant. So these are remember that third of folks I talked
Yep.
about that didn't do well. So even them, not all of them, can respond to ketamine. Ketamine does not affect serotonin or dopamine directly. It affects, you mentioned GABA. GABA is the primary inhibitory neurotransmitter in the brain. The GABA's close friend is glutamate, the primary excitatory. Ketamine works on the glutamate system. That was really important because in the history of psychiatry or biological psychiatry, we didn't have there was no link or specific theory or evidence that a drug that affected glutamate was antidepressant. It was all about
Got it.
serotonin. So
Yeah.
it kind of changed. And since then, so a form of ketamine called S-ketamine has come to market now 5-ish years ago for treatment-resistant depression.
Is this the nasal
The
spray?
nasal spray Spravato, yeah. So that's really kind of changed the treatment of the illness in terms of.
And how often is that used?
So the indication for that is for depression. You would come into, you have to take it at a certified clinic. So we do it at Mount Sinai. There's many other places, and you get it for twice a week for a month, and then sort of see how you do. Can you go without it, or we put you on sort of like a tapering schedule, so you
Right.
don't have to come in as much. But some folks come in still once a week, once every 2 weeks, as long as they need it for their depression. But so
After they take the intranasal dose, how many milligrams is it?
84.
Okay. After they take the intranasal dose,
Mm-hmm.
are they like high for 20, 30 minutes while they're there and then they
Yes.
leave? Or, okay.
Yeah, they have to stay. They're we call it dissociated.
Yep.
So it's an anesthetic. It's a roughly a quarter of the dose of ketamine that would be given in the context of like surgery.
Right.
So you don't go to sleep, but you're definitely altered.
Right.
The technical term is dissociation, but you feel disconnected from your body. Things seem larger, smaller. People describe distortions in time perception, and
Yep.
it's very variable. Some people feel mild. They say it feels like maybe like I had a drink, that type of thing.
Yeah.
And others are like, I went to a different dimension, came back.
Almost
And,
like psychedelic. Yeah. That's,
Exactly.
yeah,
Well,
that's what I
now
was- yeah.
with psychedelics, now people are saying, well, ketamine is also a psychedelic.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because it wasn't sort of discovered and then developed for depression as a psychedelic.
right.
And yet, in hindsight, maybe it was like the first
The
that
first,
came to market.
like nature's psychedelic.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's right. Or
So
the
when
first that
people
would be
come in
treated,
for treatment,
yeah,
like in the moment they're disassociated, but
Lasts about
the
20
point
minutes,
is
yeah.
it changes something in your brain that then treats you long term.
That's what we think. Yeah,
Okay.
that's what we think. And they have to stay about 2 hours, and then again, just like you would be discharged from surgery after like a day procedure or something, the anesthesia clears and you can go home.
Okay. Anesthesia as in the
The
ketamine.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if I'm a patient living in New York and I want to see if I'm a candidate for any of these
Yeah,
things,
yeah.
how would someone find out if they could come join the ketamine trial or this facial light trial?
Yeah. So look us up online, the Depression and Anxiety Center at Mount Sinai.
So what we'll do for people listening at the end, we'll make sure that we put like a link or a QR code
Yeah.
down that you can look that up.
Yeah. So the if you're looking for studies and care in depression, you'll find our website. So we're sort of the depression center within psychiatry. If you're looking for treatment for something else, then there are other areas for that.
Okay.
And so we offer treatments, consultations, but then much of what we do are clinical trials, including psychedelics, doing a study with psilocybin now in depression, several with ketamine. Again, most of our studies have brain imaging. So, folks, I think that volunteer for our studies, they have the illness that we're trying to understand, but they also want to give back. So we say,
Right.
do you mind if we scan your brain? Can we check your hormone levels? And most of the time they say, absolutely.
How many incidentalomas do you find or aneurysms?
It's not common, but that's one of the things that
Yeah.
hopefully it's a benefit actually for people because everybody that does a research MRI gets read by a radiologist at Mount Sinai. It's
They're
free.
getting expert opinion right
It's free
there.
to you.
Yeah.
And if we see something, then we'll tell you about it and suggest you follow up with your doctor. So that happens sometimes. So that can be sort of a benefit to people.
Can you tell us about a success story that you've had with seasonal affective disorder? One of your patients, maybe?
Yeah, let me think. I mean, I had a patient who I'm thinking she was a woman in her, I think, early 50s who I had treated for, I had seen her off and on in my practice for a couple years. And she presented with depression, again, loss of energy, fatigue, was still able to function and work. And she hadn't responded to a few medications. She was in therapy. We made some adjustments. And actually, she ultimately felt better with medication adjustments, we call them, sort of
Yep.
educated guesses. You tried A, let's try B.
Yep.
This is kind of the trial and error that kind of defines medication treatment currently. Got better. then didn't hear from her, came back. And it took a little while. And then I think we both realized kind of at the same time that, oh, it's kind of like in the fall that this is happening, right?
Yeah.
So it just took a while. But once we figured that out, then we knew that, again, every time, okay, enjoy your summer. Now we're going to add, so a common medicine to add on top of a first-line standard treatment like Prozac are called, they're actually dopamine modulators. They're also called second-generation antipsychotics. These are things like aripiprazole, quetiapine.
Yep.
These are approved.
Seroquel.
Exactly, adjunctive treatments. And they can be important sort of add-on medicines, but we don't like to use them if we don't need to. So we came up with a plan where we would add that medicine as the fall was coming.
Like Labor Day hits, start taking your Seroquel.
Exactly. Yeah. And that did the trick. And, she got her winters back and,
but like I'm sure like keeping a diary had to be helpful for that. Like you have to track
monitoring.
yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. Humans are just terrible record keepers. I'm the worst. Doctors say, when did that start? I don't know.
Yeah.
And
You're like recently. Like what does recently mean to you?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
I ask the patients all the time, well, they've been headaches for so long. I was like, so long to me is like a year. How long is so long to you? Oh, like 2 weeks.
Right. Or the patient that, do you have any prior medical history? Nope, not really. You look at the chart and there's a list
and
from
and they're like, well, I'm on all of these medications. They don't control it, so I don't have the problem. And I'm like, right.
So I don't, again, I never, learned long ago, you never blame the patient because we're all human. And we're just not, our brains are not built to tell doctors accurate histories. It just doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
So journaling's important. And so I think that's, anticipate kind of what's
prevention.
Yeah.
Okay, my last question for you before you decide that there's anything that I missed. Is there any vitamins or supplements that you recommend for people that could be helpful?
So there's a few supplements that have pretty good evidence in depression. One is St. John's wort. So I have some patients that's that little thing they'll do. They'll start taking their St. John's wort in the fall and winter months. There's some evidence for vitamin D. Now, we know vitamin D is released by sun, and that's important. You have to be a
lot of people are vitamin D deficient.
Right. So I would say that one, I'd rather get a test to see your vitamin D level because you can also kind of overdo it, right? So I don't want people running out and just taking tons of vitamin D, but that is something we look at. So when we do an intake and measure vitamin levels, definitely look at vitamin D.
Okay.
If you're deficient, it's a no-brainer. Yes, we want to replace that. And then there's sort of debate about supra threshold. Do you push it above the standard recommendations? And there's mixed data on that.
What about vitamin B? Because I know that can help with mood.
Yeah, vitamin B, there's less evidence for, interestingly. But again, that would be the type of thing that for sure we would want to check you're not deficient.
Right.
As long as you're not deficient, the evidence that taking more is not that good. There's some data.
How about caffeine?
Folic acid is another one.
Okay.
Actually, that has, I think, St. John's wort and folic acid, I think, have kind of, if you looked at the most sort of randomized clinical trials. And there's even an interesting drug. It's I think they call it, it's a bizarre designation, like a medical food. It's not a drug. I think it's called Deplin.
I've heard of that.
Right. It's an FDA cleared or approved sort of highly bioavailable form of folic acid that actually has pretty good evidence to add to your ongoing treatment. So that would be something to check out.
What about caffeine just for energy?
I mean, if you're like me, you got to have it in the morning. But again, caffeine is one of those things that everyone's so different.
Everyone's so different.
It affects everyone differently. So, if a doctor said, I can't have caffeine anymore, that'd be a big problem.
That'd be a real problem.
But I've had patients that, I had one patient that his real problem, he just had anxiety that was tough to treat, and we were doing medication changes. I was having him keep thought logs, like what are the specific thoughts that keep you anxious, and then I must have missed it in my evaluation because we were many months into the treatment, and he mentioned in passing about he takes caffeine pills throughout the day.
Oh, gosh.
And exactly. And I was like, you take what?
You're like, how many milligrams are we talking?
I can't remember, but needless to say, once we stopped the caffeine pill, suddenly his anxiety went away. So, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's caffeine.
When I take too much caffeine, because I'll take like a pre-workout to go to the gym or something. I mean, I feel the blood flowing through my fingertips,
Yeah.
and I
Oh,
have
yeah.
to stay there on the treadmill until it goes away.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about nicotine? So nicotine for years was like nicotine's bad, smoking's bad, but now
Yep.
like oral nicotine as like a focus supplement. Is any thoughts on nicotine?
I have not seen that.
Okay.
I actually haven't. I'd be curious what. I was still back in the nicotine is bad. I mean, it was
Well,
always
in the world of like brain health, longevity, health span world,
Yeah.
people are talking about nicotine.
Interesting.
There's a lot of like people use Zyn, but there's also like Knick Knack and Lucy. There's nicotine supplements where you can supplement with like 1, 2, or 3 milligrams of
I need to
nicotine
catch up on
that
this.
work with focus.
Okay.
And it's a mood booster too.
I see.
So it's oral nicotine.
I need to check that because I know, I mean, I think it's been a little while, but I think there was still debate, the link between smoking and cancer is certainly not debated. And I think it's a lot of stuff a lot of reason to believe that in the smoke,
Right.
not the nicotine
Not the
itself.
actual nicotine.
Right.
Yeah.
And then with vaping, that was thought to be,
Yes.
well,
So this is nicotine that gets orally absorbed in your gut.
right.
Pure nicotine.
Right. But I wonder, because I
So
still
you'll have to get back to me about this.
because I still thought there was some reason to think that nicotine itself may be carcinogenic.
So
But I have to check
I have
that.
been taking nicotine ahead of my pre-work, like
Yeah.
as a pre-workout
Yeah.
instead of a caffeine, so I can actually fall asleep at night.
Yep.
It's got a pretty quick onset, like 15 to 20 minutes, and it
Yep.
lasts for about half an hour to 45 minutes. And from what I've read online, very basic,
Yep.
is it's almost like it's got some like anti-inflammatory, antioxidant values to it,
Yep.
but also it really improves focus. Like I lock in almost as well as I do when I'm have a pre-workout.
Cigarettes. I mean, when you talk to people
Yeah.
that would smoke, I mean, that's and we know that nicotine, absolutely. I mean, the research in trying to boost cognitions within, for example, in psychiatry, like in illnesses like schizophrenia,
Yeah.
that's been a major focus, and literally a receptor that they try to target is called the nicotinic receptor,
exactly.
like acetylcholine.
Yeah.
So definitely, I'll look into
All
it
right,
a
so
little bit.
follow up with me for nicotine
I'll let you know
with regard to
because
depression. Okay.
Yeah. Well, and also, is it safe? Again, because
Yeah.
it does have. History.
I'm one of those believers that if somebody can sell it to me in a package, somebody must have thought that was safe.
Yeah. I'm sure
Which
someone
is
did.
ridiculous. I know that. Is there anything else that like you want to talk about, you want our viewers to hear? Did I miss anything that's important to you?
I really can't think of anything.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
We did a good job.
Yeah, this was great.
So for our viewers or people listening, what we learned today is you don't have to sit home and be miserable and miss days of work. You can seek help. You can make an appointment to see your primary care. You can make an appointment to see a psychiatrist. You can call here at Mount Sinai. There are medications. There's therapies. If you really don't want to go in and see a provider, we talked about the kind of light therapy that you can maybe look into online, but you need to be doing it for 30 minutes a day, and it should be in the morning for it to work properly. You can't do it willy-nilly. And then there's lots of different things that we're learning here. So if you want to get a real deep dive into helping the research of this, you'll click the link and we will make sure that you get evaluated to see if you can participate in a study or being seen by one of our doctors here. So hopefully this is coming out just in time so you have improvement this winter. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. This was great. Thank you.
Yep. That's all for this episode of The Vitals. I'm your host, Leslie Schlachter. Subscribe to the Mount Sinai Health System on YouTube and to The Vitals on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to get help for seasonal affective disorder or get evaluated for depression, you can scan the QR code below or you can click the link in the description to learn more.